Professor Burk, Macedonia has become sort of a fake news capital since the scandal with the last US presidential elections, when one of the presidential candidates accused that there was a huge influence, that the election result was heavily influenced by the fake news that came from the Macedonian town of Veles. Do you believe that fake news nowadays are so influential that they can affect the results of the elections and the election of the most powerful president in the world?
First of all, I want to say about the U.S. presidential election that there were many factors that went into the outcome. And fake news was an important factor, evidently. It wasn't the only factor. So we have to keep that in mind. Mm-hmm. More broadly speaking, fake news is a phenomenon that is threatening accountable governance. It confuses, it scares people, and it really should be addressed. In a situation like Macedonia, and Macedonia is facing a situation in the coming weeks and months where some very important issues that determine the future of the country are going to be debated and ultimately decided. And it's incumbent on every citizen to take responsibility for their actions, in that to make sure that people have a basis of real news to decide some important issues and decide the future, and to make sure that fake news does not spread and unduly interfere with all the processes.
As you said, this is crucial times for Macedonia. How do we counter fake news and propaganda, lies in the media, when it's so important that the citizens, the people, really get the real story out of what's happening now in the country?
Well, first of all, it's incumbent on journalists to report fairly and accurately, to really go above and beyond. And I know journalists act with time pressure. They have to get out news very quickly these days, but they have to take time to make sure what they are reporting is accurate. But also, for every citizen in the country, they have every citizen has a responsibility when they're on social media, for example, to think about what they're sharing and to make sure that the stories that they are sharing are responsibly reported, that it's real news. One way that they can do that is look at the headline and actually take time to read the stories and read beyond the headline, because the headlines of fake news are usually sensational. Make sure that the body of the text of the story matches this and substantiates the headline. Another thing to do is look at the URL of any website that they're reading. Is it a complicated, obscure website? The title of the news outlet sometimes can indicate, well, is it sketchy or not? Another thing that fake news always, invariably, the kind of fake news that influences elections either tries to scare people or confuse people. People should take that into consideration when they're sharing, because that's how fake news thrives, when it is shared irresponsibly. So every citizen needs to think the future of this country is potentially at stake. The country is at a crossroads. Every citizen can think about what they're doing and contribute to a process that is decided free of outside interference and is expressing the true will of the population.
Mm-hmm. I will go back to what happened in the United States and their presidential elections and would ask you whether you think Russia has any role in this, and does Russia use any of these methods of propaganda and fake news in the Balkan region and from the Balkan region?
It's pretty conclusive that Russia had a deliberate campaign to interfere with the democratic process in the United States. There is also Russia's military doctrine and strategic doctrines, first of all, have sanction the use of quote-unquote weaponized information. So information, the information space is a sphere that is part of an entire strategic area that is connected with Russia's strategic interests. So it is, given those considerations, plus the fact that Russia in other cases in the past has steadfastly opposed any sovereign state's efforts to move closer to Western institutions such as NATO and the European Union, more so NATO. Russia has taken active measures to disrupt those processes. Given all of these factors, and especially the Kremlin, we have to differentiate. There is Russia as a state and a nation, the Russian people, and the Kremlin. The Kremlin has taken steps in the past in similar situations to go to extreme lengths to disrupt efforts to integrate with NATO in particular.
That would say that the Balkan region would be interesting for Russia right now, because a lot of countries from this region are now moving closer to the European Union and especially to NATO.
It might have been in the past that Russia hasn't been very active here in Macedonia, but what's happened yesterday and what can happen in June, and then what happens after that, could maybe make Russia more interested in what's happening in Macedonia. So I think it is fair to expect Russia to take a far greater interest in Macedonian domestic events in the future.
Professor Burk, thank you for the interview for Sittel.
Thank you very much for having me.